Why was she standing alone at the fence while the others slept soundly inside the barracks? Maybe because Flora Mitchell had grown used to solitude, to being the ghost in the background no one ever noticed until something broke. The Romanian dawn was slow in coming, the mist clinging to the tree line like it was afraid to let go, and Flora's hands, small, steady, wrapped around a mug of tea that had gone cold hours ago. She had been awake since 300, not because of orders, not because of duty, but because sleep rarely stayed with her for long. Each morning felt like the same muted loop, boots crunching on gravel as night patrols returned, diesel generators humming a low dirge, the radio operators calling out coded traffic to distant command posts. She'd been here for 7 months, yet she still felt like a visitor, an extra in someone else's story. The armory sat only a few dozen meters from her vantage point, sealed tight. Inside, the .50 caliber rifle gathered dust in its locked case. 6 months untouched. 6 months ignored. 6 months waiting for the right hands or perhaps the right moment. Nobody thought those hands could belong to her. Flora Mitchell was 25, barely 5'3" and 115 pounds on a full stomach. A Scottish Highlands girl who had been shuffled into logistics because that was where people like her belonged. She could memorize serial numbers without trying, break down a radio blindfolded, and restore malfunctioning optics with nothing more than a field kit and sheer patience. Her peers even called her Pocket, a nickname that wasn't cruel but wasn't kind either. Pocket, as if she were something small enough to tuck away. Inside the briefing tent, the energy was tight, serious, focused. The red and green markers plastered across satellite images told a story everyone here wanted to be a part of, everyone except Flora, who was already rehearsing the lines she knew would be handed to her. She took her place in the back row, stylus ready, though she already knew her role. Major Alexander, his face carved by years of combat and sleepless nights, stood at the front. His voice carried the kind of authority that didn't need to be raised. "Today's reconnaissance is Silent Eagle," he announced. "Enemy sniper teams have established positions in the foothills. Our job is to identify and, if necessary, eliminate." Flora's stylus froze over her tablet as he began calling names. Reeves. Operators who had become her peers in training but not in reality. Each name stung in a way she had learned to hide, her expression calm even as her chest tightened. "Mitchell," said at last. For a half-second her heart jumped, traitorous and hopeful. "You're on gear accountability. Ensure all optics and communication equipment are upon return." Gear accountability, again. Flora nodded, professional, silent, invisible. Around her, the chosen operators exchanged quick grins, adrenaline sparking through their conversations as they discussed infiltration routes and covering fire. She might as well have been furniture in the corner. On her way out, she caught the fragments she wasn't meant to hear, muttering low too, "Good thing Mitchell isn't coming with us. No offense, but I wouldn't want someone that small covering me." Tried to soften it, but the knife was already buried. She's competent enough, but competent isn't combat ready. Flora walked past as if she hadn't heard, but every word branded itself deep. Too small, too delicate, too much of a liability. It didn't matter that her scores on the range eclipsed half of them. It didn't matter that her tactical reports often spotted weaknesses others missed. It didn't matter because perception had become its own kind of armor, harder than Kevlar, harder than steel. And she was always on the wrong side of it. Back in the armory, Flora let herself breathe. She slid open the drawer of her personal locker and pulled free a notebook so worn its cover was nearly soft to the touch. A ballistics journal filled with equations and calculations that nobody had asked for, nobody would ever look at, but that she carried like a lifeline. Wind patterns, elevation angles, range estimations. Hand-drawn maps with tiny arrows showing where a sniper might set up, where a counter-sniper might move, where a team might die if they weren't careful. Her obsession had always circled back to the sleeping beast of the arsenal, 29 pounds of steel and recoil and unapologetic force. Too heavy for her, they whispered. Too much gun for someone like her, which was why she'd studied it more than anything else. She had memorized its velocity curves, its bullet drop across distance, its scope adjustments. She had created firing solutions for ranges across the ridges, calculated by hand, rehearsed until they lived behind her eyelids. Nobody knew, nobody cared, but Flora believed in being ready for the chance no one would ever give her. The helicopters thundered overhead at 6:30. She stood on the helipad, watching until they shrank into dots against the mountains. Then she turned back to her assigned duties, inventory logs, checklists, maintenance reports, the dull work of someone too small to matter. But somewhere in her chest, a pulse of defiance kept beating. 3 weeks later, the Silent Eagle team returned with commendations. Flora watched from across the mess hall as they celebrated, her tea cooling in her hand, her presence as forgettable as always. That was when the whispers began, not about the mission but about her. "Mitchell spends a lot of time in the armory, don't you think?" Harrison said to someone during an inspection, his tone low but calculated. "Way more than logistics really needs to." Flora froze mid-step. His words carried the venom of suspicion disguised as casual talk. Too intense, too focused, too curious about things outside her lane. When she confronted him afterward, Harrison shrugged. "Don't get defensive, Mitchell. I'm just saying maybe focus on what you're actually assigned. Don't try to play operator." Operator, the word landed like a slammed door. By the time she sat across from Major in his office, the narrative had already taken root. He tapped her record with fingers that felt more like a judge's gavel than a commander's hand. "Mitchell, you are technically proficient, comprehensive, but there are concerns that your focus is misaligned." "Sir, I've never neglected my duties." "That is not the issue. The issue is scope. You study ballistics tables, tactical procedures, weapons systems, things outside your area of responsibility. It creates questions about your intentions." Her intentions. The cold spread through her chest like ice water. "My only intention is to be the best soldier I can be." Leaned back, his gaze heavy. "The mission requires you to track equipment, nothing more. Scale back the extracurriculars." Flora left with her jaw tight, her notebook clutched like contraband. In her quarters, she stared at its pages long into the night. She could hide it. She could give in, shrink herself into the role they had decided was hers. Instead, she locked it safely away. Because if today proved anything, it was that being ready wasn't about recognition. It was about survival. The Romanian morning that followed was colder than usual. Flora was on the firing range alone, her service rifle braced against her shoulder, her breathing slow, her shots grouping within 2 inches at 300 meters. Better than most marksmen in the unit. But no one was watching. No one was supposed to. Every round she fired was requisitioned under the guise of equipment testing. Every adjustment she made was logged as maintenance checks. And every note she scribbled in her journal became another brick in a secret foundation no one believed she had the right to build. The still waited in its case, a giant sleeping in the dark. Flora whispered to it sometimes when no one was around. Not words, not prayers, just a silent promise. When the time came, if it ever came, she would be ready. And though she could not see the future, some part of her knew. That time was closer than anyone realized. What happens when dedication begins to look like obsession? Flora hadn't meant for it to get this far, but whispers had a way of growing louder than facts, and once suspicion started, it spread like wildfire. At first, it was Sergeant Williams questioning her inventory reports, his eyes squinting like she'd deliberately misplaced optics to cause trouble. "Mitchell, you certain about these counts?" he asked one afternoon, his pen tapping against the clipboard in a rhythm meant to unsettle. "Because if something's missing, command will want answers." She didn't flinch. She had triple-checked the numbers. They were right. They were always right, but the seed of doubt was planted and she could see it sprouting in the sidelong glances of others. The strange part was, competence was supposed to be her shield. She had outworked them all, outscored most on tests, outlasted doubts by proving herself again and again. And yet, the better she became, the more their unease grew. Soon, maintenance reports were flagged, requisition requests scrutinized. Even her training laps counted twice by officers who had never noticed her before. It was as if excelling too much, caring too much, had turned her from reliable into suspicious. It came to a head during a briefing on updated ballistics equipment. She sat in her usual back row seat, pen racing across her tablet as Major droned about protocols. Then she heard it. Her name, spoken too low for her to ignore. "I'm just saying," Private whispered. "Mitchell spends an unusual amount of time in the armory, more than logistics really requires." "What's that supposed to mean?" his neighbor asked. "Maybe nothing, but she's always asking about long-range systems, studying ballistics data, things that aren't her job. Makes you wonder what she's planning." Her pen froze mid-stroke. Heat flushed through her cheeks. She had thought her late nights were invisible. She had thought her curiosity was harmless. Afterward, she cornered near the depot. "Do you have something to say to me directly?" He looked caught, his words stumbling. "It's nothing personal. You just come across intense, you know. It's like you're trying to be something you're not." "My lane," she said, voice steady, though her hands trembled at her sides, "is making sure this unit is ready. If that means learning ballistics, then I'll learn ballistics." "Don't get defensive," he said, holding up his palms. "I'm just saying maybe focus on what you're assigned. Don't try to play operator." There it was again, operator, as if she were a child trying on clothes that didn't fit. Flora walked away before her anger boiled over, but the words gnawed at her. Her thoroughness, the thing that made her invaluable, was being twisted into ambition, dangerous ambition. Even Sarah, the only other woman she trusted, began keeping her distance, as if proximity to Flora might contaminate her standing. When Major finally summoned her to his office, the air felt heavy with judgment. Her file lay open on his desk like evidence in a trial. "You are technically proficient," he said, fingers drumming. "Your attention to detail is comprehensive, but concerns have been raised." Her pulse quickened. "Concerns?" "About your focus, about your intentions." Her mouth went dry. "My intentions." He leaned back, his eyes sharp. "You study weapon systems, tactical doctrines, procedures outside your role. Logistics is your assignment. That is where your focus must remain." She straightened her spine. "Sir, my only intention is to be the best soldier I can be." His reply was quiet, final. "The mission requires you to track equipment, nothing more. Scale back the extracurriculars." Flora left the office with her fists clenched so tightly her nails dug crescents into her palms. The notebook burned in her bag, every page suddenly transformed from preparation into accusation. That night, she stared at it under the dim, yellow light of her quarters. She considered locking it away forever, surrendering to the narrow definition others had forced upon her. But she didn't. She smoothed the pages flat, tracing the inked calculations with steady fingers. She wasn't wrong. She couldn't be. Being ready was not disobedience. It was survival. Still, the weight of isolation pressed on her chest like a stone. She carried it to the firing range in the mornings before dawn, where no one could see the grouping of her shots or the way she adjusted for wind shifts by instinct. Her bullets landed with precision most operators struggled to achieve. And yet, her training requests were, her place in missions non-existent. No one saw her potential, no one wanted to. The haunted her, locked away, too powerful for someone like her, too dangerous for a soldier without the right patch on her sleeve. Yet she knew it, every piece of it, every screw, every scope setting, every brutal recoil measurement. She had studied it as if one day it might choose her. The others laughed about it sometimes, the idea of Pocket even lifting the beast. It was a weapon for giants, not for her. But the truth was stranger. Her size was an advantage. Smaller frame, lower center of gravity, steadier prone position. She knew it. She had proven it in secret, lifting weights, bracing her body, training muscles that most never noticed under her uniform. She was ready, she just wasn't allowed. And that was the thing, watching mistakes unfold that she could have prevented. During one mission debrief, she had highlighted a pattern in enemy sniper activity, overlapping kill zones designed to trap advancing forces. She had prepared detailed countermeasures. Major thanked her with a dismissive nod and set her report aside. 2 days later, a team walked straight into the trap. 3 men were wounded. The after-action review focused on weapons and responses, never the ignored intelligence that might have saved them. Flora sat in silence, her jaw tight, her notebook heavy in her lap. She had seen it coming. She had said it. She had been invisible. Invisible competence, invisible preparation, invisible potential. The cycle was unbreakable. She wasn't in the room when strategies were made, so her ideas never reached the table. And because her ideas never reached the table, she was excluded from strategy. Over and over again, the walls built higher around her. There was the final wall. Its locked case in the armory became a symbol of everything she was. She would walk past the window at night, catching glimpses of it in the shadows, its long barrel a reminder of possibilities kept out of reach. Some nights she lingered too long. Some nights she imagined what it would feel like to shoulder it, not in secret, not as a study piece, but as a lifeline. Until one night, she didn't just imagine. The armory was silent, its doors sealed, the air heavy with oil and steel. She had timed the guard rotations down to the minute, memorized the access code from months of careful observation. Her hands didn't shake as she entered. The emergency lights cast everything in red, the rifles lined up like sentinels. She moved straight to this case, her breath tight but steady. When she lifted it, the weight nearly staggered her, but only for a second. Then it settled, familiar, balanced. Not too heavy, not too much, just as she had known all along. She couldn't fire it, not without raising alarms, but she practiced everything else, loading, adjusting scopes, shifting positions, bracing her body until muscle memory replaced thought. She made it hers in the silence of forbidden hours. Night after night, she returned. Each session another brick in the secret foundation only she believed mattered. She was building towards something she couldn't name, a moment she couldn't predict but felt deep in her bones was inevitable. Sometimes as she pressed her cheek against the stock, she thought about what it all meant. Was this pride, rebellion, or was it something simpler, refusing to let others define her limits? It became her mirror, not just a weapon, but a symbol of what she might be if anyone ever let her prove it. And though the corridors whispered her name like suspicion, though had told her to shrink, though even Sarah had stepped back, Flora kept preparing. Because she believed one truth so deeply, it had become part of her heartbeat. When the moment came, she would be ready, even if no one else believed she should be. What do you do when the truth you see is the one no one else wants to hear? Flora asked herself that question almost daily now. Each time she raised her hand in a briefing, each time her analysis was cut short, each time she was told to stay in her lane. The maps were spread across the table in the operations room, red blotches indicating known enemy activity in the foothills. Major's pointer traced along his voice clipped, steady. Increased sniper threats in these zones. We believe they are coordinating across valleys. Advanced equipment, likely foreign-trained. Flora leaned forward, her heart quickening. She had studied this exact sector. The elevations, the natural choke points, the way overlapping fields of fire could create kill zones for any conventional approach. She had even mapped potential counter-sniper positions in her notebook. "Sir," she said carefully, raising her hand, "I've analyzed those ridges. There are at least 3 positions with overlapping sight lines. If we adjust our approach routes. Mitchell's interruption was sharp, final. His eyes narrowed like a blade cutting through her words. Logistics, not tactics. How many days of ammunition can we sustain for extended ops? The dismissal was public, humiliating. Around her, men shifted uncomfortably, some with smirks, others avoiding eye contact altogether. The silent chorus was clear. There she goes again. Flora forced her voice steady. 14 days at current consumption rates, sir. Good, that's all I needed. Turned back to Reeves, the unit's lead marksman. Your assessment of engagement ranges. And just like that, Flora disappeared from the conversation again. Inside her chest, heat pulsed like a live coal. She had seen it clear, undeniable, but they would not hear her. After the meeting, she caught Sergeant Williams in the corridor, hoping maybe, just maybe, someone would listen off record. She laid out her terrain analysis, the fields of fire, the likely sniper hides. He listened politely, nodding as though humoring her. Then, interesting stuff, Mitchell, but that's outside your wheelhouse. The operators have training for this. Your job is equipment. But Sergeant, she pushed, her voice tight, if they approach from the standard routes, they'll walk right into crossfire. I've identified 3. That's enough. His voice hardened, the warning clear. Stay in your lane, you're good at what you do, don't overstep. She bit down on her reply, swallowing the words that clawed at her throat. Stay in your lane, stay invisible, stay small. The cycle was becoming unbearable. She was permitted to be excellent within a box, but the moment she stepped beyond it, her competence turned into suspicion. Training days were no different. While others practiced advanced tactics, she was relegated to clipboards and timing stopwatches. When new equipment arrived, she never tested it. When mission briefings required clearance she didn't have, she was excluded, though her job depended on anticipating the very requirements those missions would create. Even worse, she saw the mistakes unfolding, preventable mistakes. A month earlier, a reconnaissance team had walked into resistance at a checkpoint she had flagged from intercepted radio traffic. 3 men injured, and all because her analysis, filed as administrative observation, had been ignored. Every time it happened, her notebook grew heavier, thicker, a collection of foresight no one wanted, a map of truths silenced before they could save lives. And the always that remained locked away. She saw it nightly through the armory window, its long black body gleaming faintly under dim lights. It had become the ultimate symbol of everything she was. The weapon she knew inside out, the system she had trained herself to master, yet would never be allowed to touch in combat. Until one night, she broke the unspoken rule. The maintenance gate yielded under her hands, the code pad blinking green with a code she wasn't supposed to know. Inside, the red glow of emergency lights painted the rows of weapons like a dream. She moved straight to this case. Her hands didn't tremble as she opened it. The rifle emerged like a predator waking, massive yet balanced, its weight nearly 30 pounds across her arms. Heavy, yes, but not too heavy, not impossible, not for her. She lowered into prone, practiced scope adjustments, shifted her body until the steel and flesh became one. She had rehearsed it all in her head. Now it was real. No bullets, no live fire, she wasn't reckless. But she made the weapon hers. Loading procedures, bolt actions, sight calibrations. Again and again until the mechanics sank into muscle memory. She had cover, too. As logistics, she could justify time in the armory under the guise of detailed inspections. No one questioned her presence there. No one suspected the hours she poured into turning the beast into something familiar, intimate. Her notebook thickened with range cards, every position within 30 kilometers mapped and calculated. Bullet drop, wind drift, humidity, elevation. She had studied until she could recite values in her sleep. The more they dismissed her, the more she prepared. And it wasn't ambition that drove her now. Not pride, something deeper, a quiet conviction that when the moment came, and it would come, she would be ready whether or not they allowed her. It was around this time the alarms came. 8:47 hours. The bass loudspeaker wailed, splitting the still morning air. Flora dropped her clipboard, sprinting to the command center with dozens of others. Radios crackled with chaos. Contact left. Multiple hostiles pinned down, need immediate support. Flora froze as the voice came through. Sergeant Reeves, Eagle 6, the lead marksman, the one who had been handed the mission she had been. Major stood in the center, eyes fixed on the tactical display, radios balanced in both hands. Eagle 6, report status. Reeves's voice was strained, jagged. Sir, we've got eyes on the target building, but enemy snipers have us locked down. 2, possibly 3 positions. Overlapping fields of fire. They've got every approach covered. Flora's chest tightened. The scenario, the exact one she had written weeks ago in her report, the one had dismissed without reading. Coordinated sniper teams, crossfire zones. They were caught in it now. Assessment of enemy weapons, pressed. High-end rifles. Impact suggests .338 minimum, possibly .50 cal, not militia professional. Flora stepped closer to the display, her mind racing. Eagle team was trapped in a valley, the snipers elevated above, crossfire angles perfect, just as she had predicted. Sir, she said, her voice cutting through the noise, there's a counterposition on the eastern ridge. If someone could reach it with long range. Not now, Mitchell snapped, eyes never leaving the screen. Her mouth clamped shut, but her pulse hammered in her ears. She could see it. The solution was right there. They just wouldn't let her say it. Eagle 6, ammunition status. Running low, sir. Maybe 2 hours max. Hit. We can't move forward, can't retreat. Turn to the pilots. Spin up Bird 1, we'll extract by air. Negative, came the reply. Weather front moving in. Visibility collapsing. Helicopters grounded for at least 6 hours. Silence spread through the command room. Not strategy, not planning, silence. Eagle team was trapped. Flora's voice broke it. Sir, with the I can reach them from the ridge, 1,200 meters. Firing solution is sound. I've studied it. I can do this. Every head turned. The air went cold. His eyes locked onto hers, disbelief curdling into anger. Mitchell, you are logistics. You are not qualified for sniper operations. I am qualified, she countered, her voice trembling but resolute. I've trained for this. I know the terrain. I know the weapon. Give me the chance to prove it. Whispers broke out across the room. Is she serious? She'd never even fired it in combat. That rifle weighs more than she does. She's lost it. His voice cut through, sharp as a blade. Categorically no, dismissed. Flora felt the sting, familiar but sharper now. Reeves's voice still crackled over the radio, tight with fear. We're losing ground. It's bleeding out. Ammunition almost gone. Her chest burned. The answer was so clear, but the wall around her was higher than ever. Barked new orders. The staff scrambled, and Flora stood frozen at the edge of the room. Every second wasted was another drop of blood in the valley. She turned and walked out, the whispers of disbelief following her like shadows. Through the window of her quarters, she could see the command center, the frantic movements inside, the desperation mounting. She knew what they didn't, the ridge, though the math that lived inside her head. The answer was there. And for the first time, Flora began to wonder if the only way to save them was to stop asking permission. How far would she go to prove what no one believed? That question pressed against Flora's ribs as she sat alone in her quarters, radio chatter filtering faintly through the walls. Eagle team's voices reached her even here. Shallow breathing. Reeves's clipped reports. The silence between transmissions that grew longer each time, heavier with fear. She could see the solution as clearly as the lines on a map. Eastern Ridge. .50 cal, 3 shots, but official channels had closed against her. The wall was too high, the locks too tight. His order still echoed in her ears. "You are dismissed." Dismissed while her teammates bled. She stared down at her gear locker, at the sealed envelope she had written months ago to her sister back in Scotland. It was meant for moments like this, explaining why some decisions mattered more than survival, more than obedience. She slid it deeper into her pack. The decision crystallized. She wasn't waiting for permission anymore. At 14:30 hours, the base buzzed with frantic energy. Officers coordinated resupply drops. Runners carried updates between buildings. No one noticed the small woman slipping quietly toward the armory. Her credentials gave her cover. Logistics always had reasons to be near the weapons. Nobody questioned it. Nobody looked twice. Inside, the air was cool, metallic. The rows of rifles gleamed under fluorescent lights. And there it was, locked in its case, a giant asleep. Her fingers moved with practiced precision, unlocking, lifting, bracing. 29 pounds across her shoulders, heavy but familiar, like carrying an old truth. She crouched low, moving through the shadows, her pulse steady despite the enormity of what she was doing. Every step was a line crossed, every breath another mile away from obedience. At the maintenance gate, the steel lock resisted for 90 long seconds before clicking open beneath her careful hands. She slipped through the gap and into the open countryside, the cold Romanian wind whipping across her face. Behind her, the base still searched for answers. In front of her, Eagle Team was dying. The ground rolled into hills, scattered vegetation breaking the landscape into patches of cover and exposure. She moved quickly, shoulders bowed beneath the rifle's weight. Her body had been conditioned for this. The endless nights of strength training, the climbs with sandbags, the long marches no one knew about. Now it paid off. Radio chatter hissed in her ear. "Base, enemy snipers are shifting, crossfire tightening, we're running out of options." Reeves's voice cracked, raw with desperation. Flora pushed harder, the bouncing against her back with each stride. She knew the clock. 20 minutes, maybe less, before Eagle Team's ammunition was gone. The ridge loomed ahead, steep, jagged, unforgiving. Her eyes traced the path she had memorized months ago from maps and imagery. Narrow gullies, exposed slopes, a final climb along a knife-thin ledge. She began the ascent. Every handhold scraped her palms, every foothold threatened to crumble. The rifle's length made maneuvering awkward, its weight pulling her balance off-center. She had practiced for this, in secret climbs behind the motor pool, with weighted poles lashed to her pack. She had trained for the impossible. Now the impossible was real. Halfway up, she paused, chest heaving. Through the scope, she caught glimpses of the valley below. Eagle Team crouched behind crumbling walls, pinned, surrounded. Enemy snipers invisible but certain, their angles perfect, just as she had predicted. She climbed again, grit grinding between her teeth, sweat stinging her eyes. Her muscles screamed, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. The final stretch was the worst, a ledge barely wide enough for her boots, the drop sheer beneath her. Wind gusts threatened to tear her balance away. She pressed her body flat against the rock, inching forward, the dragging against the cliff face with each movement. One slip, one mistake, and it was over. Not just for her, but for the men bleeding in the valley. At last she pulled herself over the rim, rolling into the dirt of the ridge top. The world spread wide before her, perfect angles, perfect lines of sight. The position she had calculated, the one no one else had seen. She set the down, hands moving with muscle memory. Bipod deployed, scope aligned, breathing slowed. She became still, part of the ridge, part of the earth itself. Through the scope, the world sharpened. There, one sniper hidden beneath camouflage, rifle trained on Eagle Team. 847 meters, his chest rising and falling, steady, professional. Flora's own breath slowed. In for 4 seconds, hold. Out for 6, hold. the rhythm she had practiced endlessly in the dark. "Base, this is Eagle 6, Reeves's voice broke through the radio. "We're down to our last magazine. If help doesn't come now, it won't matter." Flora adjusted one final click. The math was perfect. The moment was here. She squeezed the trigger. The roared, the recoil slamming into her shoulder like a hammer, but controlled, just as she had trained. The muzzle blast echoed through the valley like thunder. Through the scope, she watched the first sniper collapse, his weapon falling silent. A crackle of stunned disbelief came over the radio. "One down," Reeves shouted. But the others were already searching, their scopes sweeping, their shots walking closer to her position. She had maybe 30 seconds. Bolt action, new round chambered. The second sniper shifted, breaking cover, trying to relocate. She tracked his movement, led the shot, breathed out, fired. Another roar, another figure falling limp into the dirt. "Two down," Eagle Team's voices erupted, adrenaline surging through the comms. "Move, move, move." But the third sniper had found her. The rock near her cheek exploded, shards cutting her skin. The crack of high-velocity rounds closed in, the enemy zeroing on her position. She pressed to the earth, blood trickling down her face, eyes fixed through the scope. The third sniper was well covered, only a sliver of shoulder visible. It would take a perfect shot, under fire, under pressure, under disbelief. Another round struck inches from her scope. She didn't blink. Her breathing slowed again, the chaos fading into silence. Just her heart, her finger, the crosshairs. She squeezed. The thundered a third time. The sliver of shoulder vanished in a spray of dust and silence. The third sniper slumped, his rifle sliding uselessly from his grip. For a moment the valley was still. Then Reeves's voice, sharp, triumphant. "All snipers neutralized, we're mobile." Relief surged through Flora's veins, her chest heaving as the adrenaline crashed. She had done it. 3 shots, 3 lives ended, an entire team saved. But the victory was edged with something darker. The muzzle blasts had given her away. She had acted without orders, broken protocol, command. The shots might have saved Eagle Team, but they had also sealed her fate. The lay across her arms, its weight heavy, its silence final. She from the ridge, each step down carrying her closer not to triumph but to consequence. The mission was complete, but the war, her war, was just beginning. How long could silence protect her? Flora wondered as she slid down the ridge, the heavy across her shoulders. Below, Eagle Team moved at last, breaking free from the valley that had nearly become their grave. Their voices on the radio were sharp, alive, urgent. Relief carried through every word. But none of that relief belonged to her. She had crossed the line, not in theory, not in whispers, but in undeniable action. The echoes of her 3 shots still hung in the valley air, loud enough to carry all the way back to base. Everyone would know. Everyone would ask. She could already hear his voice in her head. Unauthorized, insubordination, reckless. Yet when she glanced through the scope one final time and saw Eagle Team moving, weapons up, lives intact, her chest swelled with a fierce kind of pride. Pride tangled with dread. The descent was slower than the climb. Fatigue dragged at her muscles now, every joint protesting. She moved carefully, the rifle threatening to unbalance her at each step. More than once she stopped, pressing her forehead against the stone, whispering to herself to keep going. By the time she slipped back through the maintenance gate and into the compound, the sun was low. The base pulsed with chaotic energy. Radios barked. Medics sprinted. Staff officers hovered around the command center like moths circling a flame. No one noticed her at first. She kept her head down, the hidden under its case once more, her uniform streaked with dust and sweat. But whispers followed her like shadows. Where was she? Didn't command order her to quarters? Was that really her? She avoided their eyes. In her quarters she set the aside, her hands lingering on its steel as though it could still pulse with the life-or-death power it had held hours earlier. 3 shots, 3 truths, each one undeniable. The door banged open. Mitchell, Major's voice was steel. Behind him, Sergeant Williams and 2 MPs filled the doorway. His face was carved from fury and disbelief. "You're confined to quarters until further notice. Do not speak. Do not move. We'll deal with you formally." She didn't argue, she didn't explain. She only nodded. As the door slammed shut, she sat on her cot, staring at her hands. They shook now, not from fear but from the adrenaline drain. The quiet pressed against her ears until the distant rumble of helicopters broke it. Extraction flights. Eagle Team was coming home. Alive. Hours later, the mess hall buzzed with noise. She wasn't there, but she could imagine it. Reeves with his arm bandaged, pale but grinning, relaying the moment everything changed, when 3 shots cut through the hopelessness. She imagined their voices lowering when they asked who it was. She imagined the disbelief when they realized. Pocket logistics, too small, too quiet, too invisible. It would spread, and with it the storm. The next morning she was marched into the command center. Not to the back row this time, not with a tablet in her hands, but to the center, every eye on her. Stood behind the table, his hands braced against the wood, his jaw tight. "Mitchell," he said, each syllable sharp, "explain yourself." She drew in a breath. "Sir, Eagle Team was trapped. You had no air support, no extraction, no viable tactical options. I knew the ridge, I knew the range, I could take the shots, and I did." "You disobeyed a direct order," snapped. "Yes, sir." "You stole restricted equipment." "Yes, sir." "You engaged in combat operations for which you are not trained, not cleared, not authorized." "Yes, sir." Silence. The others shifted, their disbelief heavy in the air. Reeves, his arm in a sling, stood at the edge of the room, his eyes locked on hers. His voice lowered, quieter but heavier. "Do you understand what this means? Court-martial, dismissal, possibly prison." Flora's jaw tightened. "Yes, sir." "And yet," he pressed, his eyes searching hers, "you stand here without regret." Her throat burned, but her voice was steady. "Eagle Team is alive. That is what matters." The silence stretched until Reeves broke it. "Alive because of her," he said, his voice rough. Heads turned, murmurs rippled. "Cut him off with a glare. That will be all, Sergeant." But the truth hung there, undeniable. Flora was escorted back to her quarters, but this time she wasn't invisible. Every soldier she passed stared. Some with suspicion, some with awe, some with something like respect. The whispers trailed behind her like smoke. That night she opened her notebook, running her fingers over the pages. The calculations, the maps, the range cards, all of it had been dismissed as obsession, ambition, foolishness. But now it was proven. Now it was real. Still, she knew what was coming. Investigations, hearings, the grinding machinery of military justice. They would not care about the lives she had saved, only the rules she had broken. She folded her sister's letter, slipping it deeper into the pack. She might need it sooner than she thought. Days passed in limbo. She was neither punished nor praised. The investigation wound through layers of command above her, officers weighing her disobedience against the results. She heard fragments in the mess hall, words like reckless, heroic, liability, irreplaceable. Every day she ran her pre-dawn laps around the perimeter, waiting for the verdict. Every night she traced the ink in her notebook, preparing as if she still had a future in uniform. When the call finally came, she stood once more in the command center. His face was unreadable. "Mitchell," he said slowly, "proceedings have been initiated, but higher command has intervened." Her heart skipped. "They have decided," he continued, "that rather than waste your talents in prison, you will be fast-tracked. Advanced training, formal sniper school, effective immediately." Gasps rippled. Reeves grinned, his eyes bright. Even Williams's jaw slackened. Flora stood still, the words settling like snow. She was not free, She was not forgiven, but she was recognized. For the first time, officially, undeniably, she was more than logistics. Later, alone, she sat with the across her lap on the training range, authorized now, legitimate. She breathed in, breathed out, fingers steady on the trigger. The first round thundered downrange, smashing the target at 1,000 meters. Her instructors nodded. Reeves clapped her shoulder, but Flora's eyes lingered on the rising smoke, the memory of that ridge. The night she had crossed the line. She knew this wasn't triumph. It was only survival of a different kind. And survival, she reminded herself, was never permanent. How do you rebuild trust in a place where every eye once dismissed you? Flora asked herself that question the first morning she walked into sniper school. She wore the same fatigues, the same boots, the same rank on her shoulder, but something had shifted. Not in her, but in how others looked at her. She wasn't invisible anymore. The instructors didn't smile when they called her name, but their eyes lingered. They knew. Everyone knew. The woman who had taken the without permission. The woman who had orders, broken the chain of command, and still brought Eagle Team home. Some called it reckless. Others whispered miracle. Either way, her reputation had arrived before she did. Training was unforgiving. Wind calls at 1,200 meters. Shooting positions held until her muscles trembled and her skin burned against the ground. Calculations under pressure. Hours of observation drills where a missed detail could mean failure. But what others saw as trial, Flora met with a strange kind of relief. For once, she wasn't sneaking in the dark or hiding her notebooks. For once, she could put her knowledge on the table without fear of dismissal. Her size, once mocked, became a weapon. Lower profile in the grass, steadier prone position, easier concealment in tight spaces. Her mind, once called too much, became the sharpest edge in her arsenal. Equations, wind patterns, distances, they didn't overwhelm her. They calmed her. Still, the doubts followed. Instructors questioned whether her combat stress tolerance could match her calculations. They pushed her, harder than others, waiting for her to break. She didn't. When she graduated, the felt less like a dream and more like an extension of her body. Every shot was proof that the months of secrecy hadn't been wasted. Every grouping on the target board said what words never could. She belonged here. Her first sanctioned mission came sooner than she expected. A small village in the foothills had become a choke point. Enemy scouts, trained marksmen, were harassing NATO patrols from elevated heights. Flora crouched with her new team on the ridge line, the settled into the dirt before her. Reeves was there too, shoulder heeled, eyes scanning the horizon. "Range to target," he asked. 950 meters, she said without hesitation, adjusting the scope. "Wind out of the east 6 knots, 1 click left." He didn't question, he didn't smirk, he only nodded. Through the scope she found her target, a sniper tucked into brush, his rifle barrel barely visible. She slowed her breathing, the world narrowing to crosshairs and heartbeat. She fired. The shot thundered, echoing across the valley. The figure slumped motionless. "Target neutralized," Reeves confirmed, scanning with binoculars. Her team moved on without hesitation, her orders taken as naturally as if she had always been the one giving them. No one called her pocket. No one questioned if her hands were steady enough, her body strong enough, her judgment sound enough. She had proven it in the valley with Eagle Team. Now she was proving it again, mission by mission. But acceptance wasn't a switch flipped overnight. It came in increments. A nod from Sergeant Williams when she corrected a faulty range card. A quiet good shot from after a long day on Overwatch. Even still stern, still cautious, calling her Mitchell without the undertone of dismissal. Each piece was small, but together they built something she had never felt before: recognition. Still, doubt lived inside her too, not about her skills, but about the cost. She had saved lives that day, yes, but at the expense of breaking the rules that bound soldiers together. Court-martial had been avoided, but only because higher command saw usefulness in her defiance. What if the next time her judgment clashed with orders, the consequences weren't so forgiving? One night, Reeves found her cleaning the alone, the weapon disassembled across the table like puzzle pieces. "You still think about it, don't you?" he asked. She didn't look up. "Every day." "You saved us," he said simply. "Don't let them turn that into something you regret." She glanced at him then, searching his face. "You were always the one they trusted, the marksman, the soldier built for this. What did you think when you realized it was me on the ridge?" He smiled faintly. "I thought, finally, someone saw what the rest of us missed." His words sat with her, not as absolution but as something close to it. Months passed. Missions stacked one after another. Flora's calculations guided her team through valleys, across ridges, into overwatch positions that neutralized threats before they became ambushes. Each success chipped away at the old perceptions until they no longer hung over her like chains. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was essential. But with recognition came weight. Every mission placed lives on her trigger finger. Every decision carried echoes of the valley, of blood on the dirt, of Reeves's desperate voice over the radio. She had asked for this, had fought for it, but the cost was heavier than she imagined. Sometimes, after missions, she sat alone in the barracks, writing new calculations in her notebook. Not because she needed them anymore, but because it reminded her who she was before the world finally looked. The quiet soldier in the shadows, building a future no one believed in. And sometimes, late at night, she wondered, was she redeemed or simply tolerated because she had been useful? The answer didn't come, but the missions did, always the missions. On one particularly sharp winter morning, stood before the assembled team. His tone was different this time, not dismissal, not skepticism, but authority laced with respect. "Intelligence suggests 3 hostile snipers in the southern ridges," he said. "Mitchell, you will lead Overwatch. Your calculations will guide the approach." Her calculations, her leadership, spoken aloud without hesitation. Flora's jaw tightened, but her heart surged. She stepped forward, pointing to the map. "Southwest Ridge provides concealment and superior angles. Range to primary threat, 950 meters, weather conditions favorable." Nodded. "Outstanding. You're authorized for immediate deployment." Authorized. The word landed like a weight lifted, like a circle closing. The mission unfolded just as she had predicted. Concealment, patience, precision. When her shot broke the air, it wasn't desperation anymore. It was control. It was expertise. Her team returned safe. Her reputation, once fragile, now hardened into truth. Later that night, Reeves leaned across the mess table. "You know what the best part is?" he asked. She shook her head. "Watching explain to visiting officers how he always knew you had potential." Flora laughed softly, though it caught in her throat. The irony was sharp, but she didn't mind. She had learned to stop waiting for permission. Somewhere deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. Missions would grow harder, enemies sharper, mistakes costlier. But she also knew this. Preparation had met opportunity, and she had not faltered. For once, she wasn't the soldier left behind. She was the one they looked to when the impossible needed to be done. And though the doubts still whispered in the corners of her mind, she carried them like ballast, steadying her aim. Because sometimes, strength wasn't about silence or obedience. Sometimes, it was about refusing to be invisible. What happens after the applause fades? After the respect is won, after the impossible shot is made, what remains? Flora asked herself that as she lay prone on a frigid ridge, the Romanian wind cutting through her uniform like glass. The rested steady across her arms, its scope painting the valley below in sharp relief. Another mission. Another set of lives balanced on her trigger finger. Her radio buzzed. "Mitchell's status," Captain's voice was calm but tight. "Eyes on 3 targets," she replied, her voice clipped professional. "Wind steady at 5 knots. Range 1,000 meters. Engaging on your mark. Copy, you're clear." She breathed out slow, steady. The first shot cracked like thunder, the recoil jarring but familiar. One hostile down. She shifted, calculated, fired again. Second target collapsed. The third tried to retreat into brush, but her crosshairs followed, patient, unyielding. A third shot and silence fell over the valley. Her team advanced without resistance. Mission complete. But as the adrenaline ebbed, the silence pressed heavier. Each successful mission brought accolades, nods of respect, reports stamped with commendations. Yet the memory of that first ridge, of disobedience and desperation, never left her. She could still feel the sweat on her palms, the sting of disbelief in his voice, the crack of enemy rounds tearing rock inches from her skull. Now the same men who once doubted her walked confidently into fire because she was their shield. Their trust was complete, but her own trust in them, in the institution, even in herself, remained fractured. Some nights she dreamed of ragged breathing, of Reeves's voice breaking with fear. She would wake with her hands clenched, her notebook scattered across the floor, the pages whispering calculations like prayers. On one mission, things nearly fell apart. Her team had been deployed to cover an Allied convoy moving through a mountain pass. Flora positioned herself on high ground, her scope sweeping the ridges. Hours passed in silence until movement flickered. A hostile sniper, perfectly concealed, rifle already trained on the convoy. She calculated, adjusted, fired. The round hit rock inches from the target, a miss. Her breath caught. The enemy shifted, aware now, repositioning for the kill. She corrected, forced her hands steady, squeezed again. This time the bullet struck true, but not before the enemy loosed a shot that shattered the windshield of the lead vehicle. The driver survived by chance, not precision. When the convoy cleared, her hands still shook. Reeves knelt beside her, his voice low. "It happens. No one's perfect." But perfection was what she demanded of herself. Perfection was the only reason she was here at all. That night she sat alone with her notebook, recalculating, rewriting, redrawing, firing tables as though numbers could erase the memory of her near failure. She told herself it wasn't luck that had saved the driver, but part of her knew otherwise. The whispers returned, not of suspicion this time, but of myth. The tiny soldier with the giant rifle. The woman who orders and rewrote them. To some, she was a hero. To others, a cautionary tale. To Flora, she was just a soldier who had missed once and might again. During downtime, Reeves tried to cut through her silence. "You carry too much," he told her over mugs of bitter coffee. "I carry what I must," she replied. "You don't have to carry it alone." But she did. The institution still watched her with wary eyes. Every report, every mission debrief, she could feel the unspoken question. Would she obey this time, or would she follow her own judgment again? Her success had not erased her record. It had only painted over it. The tension came to a head during a briefing in late spring. Intelligence indicated enemy snipers had re-established positions near a crash site where friendly pilots were trapped. The mission was high risk, time-sensitive. Now quieter around her, more cautious, outlined the plan. Flora studied the map, her fingers tracing the. She saw a flaw immediately. The proposed approach would cross into overlapping fields of fire. She raised her voice. "Sir, if we enter here, we'll walk into a kill zone. The southwest ridge offers concealment and a cleaner angle." His eyes narrowed. The room went still. For a moment the past threatened to repeat itself. Dismissal, rejection, silence. But then Captain spoke. "I agree with Mitchell, Southwest Ridge, bet her odds." The shift was almost imperceptible, but Flora felt it like sunlight breaking through clouds. Her analysis wasn't ignored this time. It was accepted. The mission unfolded according to her plan. Her shots cleared the ridges, her calculations kept the team alive, and the pilots were extracted safely. Afterward clapped her on the shoulder. "Outstanding work, Mitchell. You're not just part of this team, you're leading it." Her chest tightened, not with pride but with the weight of what leadership meant. Every life saved was another reminder that one mistake, one miss, could undo it all. That night she returned to her quarters, the stripped and clean beside her, her notebook open once more. She wrote slowly, carefully, not numbers this time but words. Sometimes survival isn't proof of strength. It's just the absence of failure. The ink smudged under her fingers. She closed the book. Weeks later, she sat in the helicopter bay, her team gathered for another mission. Reeves grinned, his usual attempt at lightness before the storm. "Try not to make it look too easy, Mitchell." She smirked faintly, no promises. But when the rotors thundered overhead and the sky opened before them, she felt the familiar mix of fear and focus. Respect had been earned, recognition granted. Yet the doubts remained, sharp and unyielding. Because Flora knew the truth. Strength wasn't about the shots she hit. It was about carrying the weight of the ones she almost missed. And that weight was hers alone. What does redemption cost, when the world finally asks for everything you have left to give? Flora thought about that as she crouched behind a broken wall, the heavy across her lap. The air was sharp with the metallic bite of blood and smoke. Her ears rang from the explosion that had torn her team apart minutes earlier. They had walked into an ambush, not because of her calculations, not because of oversight, but because sometimes war was simply than preparation. Reeves was down, leg mangled, his face pale with shock. Shouted orders through the chaos, but his voice was drowned in the roar of enemy fire pinning them against crumbling ruins. Flora pressed her cheek against the stock, eyes narrowing through the scope. The ridge across the valley shimmered with muzzle flashes, 2, maybe 3 enemy snipers cutting off every route of retreat. Her breathing steadied, in, out, the rhythm that had carried her through every moment of doubt, every calculation, every shot that mattered. Mitchell's voice cracked, "We need a way out." She didn't answer. Words were useless now, only action mattered. The first target revealed himself with a careless shift of his rifle. She fired, this roar echoing like thunder. The figure crumpled. The second was harder, concealed, disciplined, moving between rocks with precision. She tracked him patiently, ignoring the chaos around her, the cries of pain, the whine of bullets slicing the air. When his shadow betrayed him, she squeezed again. Another roar, another silence. But the third sniper was different, smarter. He had seen her work, he was hunting her. The shot came fast, slamming into the wall inches from her head, spraying stone and dust. She ducked, heart hammering. The enemy knew her position now. She had one chance left. She crawled forward, elbows scraping, body pressed low. Each movement felt like dragging the weight of her entire past. The years of invisibility, the notebooks filled with ignored truths, the ridge where she had broken every rule just to be heard. Now there was no room for invisibility, no space for doubt. She slid into position, scope rising. The sniper's barrel glinted in the sun. He was waiting for her, steady, patient. 2 shooters locked in silence, each waiting for the other to falter. Flora breathed in. 4 seconds, hold, out, 6 seconds, hold. The math was perfect, the wind steady, the distance clear. But in the back of her mind, the whisper of that near failure haunted her. The shot that had gone wide, the driver who had lived only by chance. What if this time chance wasn't kind? Her finger hesitated. "Flora," Reeves's voice, ragged with pain, broke through the fear. "Not Mitchell, not rank, Flora." She exhaled, let the doubt leave with her breath, and she fired. The thundered one last time. The enemy rifle clattered against stone, its operator collapsing in silence. The valley stilled, the firing ended. Her team moved, dragging the wounded, regrouping under barked commands. Flora lowered her arms trembling with exhaustion. She had done it again, but this time it didn't feel like triumph. It felt like survival, bare, fragile survival. They extracted hours later, the helicopter blades whipping dust across the field as medics rushed Reeves onto a stretcher. Flora sat apart, the across her knees, her uniform torn, her face streaked with sweat and grime. Was waiting when they landed. His expression was unreadable, his jaw set. He looked at her, at the rifle, at the men alive because of her. "Another report," he said finally, his voice low. "Another hearing, another debate about whether you are a liability or an asset." She met his gaze steady. "And which am I, sir?" He didn't answer. But later, in the quiet of her quarters, Flora didn't need his answer. She knew the truth. She was both. She always had been. The soldier who broke the rules and saved the lives. The one who carried respect and suspicion in equal measure. She sat with her notebook, the pages now filled with more than numbers. Memories, reflections, fragments of thoughts written in hurried scrawl between missions. On the last page, she wrote slowly, deliberately. "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It doesn't demand. It doesn't ask permission. It simply acts. And when it does, it leaves silence behind, not for applause, but for the truth it carried." She closed the book. Outside, the night was still. The war would continue. Missions would come. Doubts would remain. But Flora had made peace with one thing: invisibility was gone. She was seen now for better or worse. And though the weight of her choices would never leave her, she carried it not as punishment, but as proof. Proof that when no one else believed, she had. And in the end, that had been enough.